second gear pull. Oh, we've got a little bit of turbo lag there. Oh, what a magnificent machine. Hey guys, and welcome to Petrol Ped. Now, if you've tuned into the channel over the last 12 months, you will have probably seen a video or two around the new Renault R5. Renault bringing back the iconic hatchback in both the R5 and with Alpine in the A290. And in those videos, I referenced the Renault 5 GT Turbo, one of the original hot hatches. Well, up until today, I've never driven a Renault 5 GT Turbo. But I've come back to visit my mate Tim, who has such an eclectic collection of cars. I was here about 18 months ago driving his Lotus Esprit Turbo, and this car was actually here then, but it was still in the midst of some restoration. Well, that restoration is now complete. Tim actually hasn't driven the car himself, but he's invited me down to experience a Renault 5 GT Turbo for the first time. And believe me, that car is very special and has an amazing story. It's not until you stand next to a car from back in the day that you realise just how big modern day cars have become. This thing is tiny. It would be dwarfed by the new Renault R5, and that by modern day standards is a small car. But it's not just the dimensions that are small, it's the weight. This weighs just 850 kilos. 850 kilos. There's no airbags, there's no crash protection, so safety's come on a long way. But 850 kilos means handling and performance. That's where this car is at. Although in the early days, the Renault 5 was actually launched in 1972, so it's the same vintage as me. And the first generation of Renault 5 ran up to 1985, and then the second generation ran all the way up to 1996. And this car is a very early second generation car, but we'll get onto that very shortly. At launch, it was never really aimed at being a performance car. There were two engine options, one that was just shy of 800cc and one just shy of 1000cc. And then they gave it a bit more and gave it an engine with just shy of 1300cc. So it was never aimed at being a massive performance car. But then in 1976, someone decided to breathe a little bit of performance on the Renault 5, and they launched the Renault 5 Alpine. Or in the UK, it was called the Renault 5 Gordini, because at the time, Chrysler owned the rights to the Alpine name and Renault couldn't use it, so they had to change the name. And that car was launched 2 months before the Golf GTI, which many people see as the first hot hatch. Arguably, this was one of the first hot hatches. But for me, the magic happened in 1982 with the launch of the Renault 5 Alpine Turbo, or Gordini Turbo if you lived here in the UK. I thought I'd walk around the car to put its size in context. I am 6'3", and the roofline is only just above my hips, really. It's just so tiny. Now, there was also a mid-engined rear-wheel drive version of the Renault 5 Turbo, so don't confuse it with that one. But I want to talk a little bit about the engine in both the Gen 1 and the Gen 2 cars, because by modern day standards, it doesn't sound that impressive, but back in the day, it really was. So let's pop the bonnet and we'll talk engine. Everything about this car is lightweight, including this bonnet. There's hardly anything to it at all. Just put the bonnet catch down. So under the bonnet then, we've got a 1.4 litre petrol engine, and in the Gen 1 cars, they had a Garrett T3 Turbo, which produced a whopping 110 horsepower. Good enough for about 111 miles an hour top end, if you were brave enough, and a 0 to 60 time of 8.7 seconds, which at the time was pretty punchy. The Gen 2 cars, which this is an early one, had a phase 1 and a phase 2. So the phase 1 engine, still a 1.4 litre, but it now had a Garrett T2 turbo, and the power went up a little bit to 115 horsepower. Now that reduced the 0 to 60 time to about 7.5 seconds. But these engines had a few challenges, a particular problem with hot start. So in 1987, they brought out the Phase 2 second generation GT Turbo, which had some water cooling for the turbo. It also had a different ignition system, so it actually got an extra 500 RPM with a bit more performance. But if we think about it, in modern day standards, even at 120 horsepower, which the Phase 2 Gen 2 cars were, that in today's standards is nothing. But don't forget, 850 kilos. That's like putting lots of power into a tennis shoe. Now, before we jump inside, I want to just point out a few of my favourite bits of styling of the old Renault 5 GT Turbo. And the first thing are the wheels. 13-inch wheels. And again, nowadays, a car with 18-inch wheels, they're small. 13-inch wheels. They're 195, 55 R13s, and they're Michelins as well. Very kind of French theme going on here. But you look at it and actually they don't look that tiny. When I walked up to it, I thought, oh, maybe they're like, I don't know, 15-inch wheels? No, 13. That's how small the car is. I've decided it's easier to crouch down doing pieces to camera around this car than trying to stand up next to it, because I'm so tall, getting me and the car in shot is actually quite difficult. One of my favourite views of this car, and also the thing I really like most about the new R5, are these tail lights and the way they've managed to carry that through to the new all-electric R5. They're so iconic, and then with the GT Turbo, I think for me the badging and just that look with the wheel arches and so on. I just remember absolutely loving these when I was a young driver growing up. This car is very special. There are less than 10 of these Gen 2 Phase 1 cars on the road in the UK apparently, and this one now is in absolutely incredible condition. It has had a full respray on the outside, and it's just one lady owner, and she clearly loved the car and looked after it very much. All the plastics are in such good condition. It's immaculate, and a real privilege to be able to get to drive it today and share it with you guys as well. And then the last thing on the outside, I've always loved the front profile of these cars. And actually, when you spend time with the original, you look at the new R5 and you can see it. The headlamps, I absolutely love the yellow lenses in the fog lamps, the GT Turbo badging. It's just so clean on the front end. But again, stood here, you can just see how small this car is. But it just oozes cool, this car. Absolutely oozes cool. It's just so cool in here. Now, when I did the R5 studio shoot in Paris last year, I mentioned about the seats in the new R5 being based on the original Turbo. Well, you can kind of see it straight away in these seats. You sit in them, they've got really big bolsters, and you sit straight down. They're quite softly sprung, but you instantly feel really kind of locked in place. The steering wheel is so basic. There's nothing to it. Obviously no airbag, there's no buttons on it at all. And then you've got this instrument cluster. And I have been in a Renault 5 GT Turbo many moons ago. I kind of looked at buying one, and I went for a test drive, and the guy who was selling it sold the car. And the thing that put me off, I think it was quite a common thing back in the day, was it had a map on the turbo. You could increase the turbo boost. There was a big knurled aluminium knob on the dashboard, and as we drove down the road, he whacked the boost pressure up and off it leapt. And I just remember sitting there going, yeah, I don't think that's going to do the longevity of the engine any good at all. But you've got a lovely old Kenwood stereo head unit down there. The window controls are just there. It's just so basic. The wash wipe is a stalk sticking out of the dash, which is bizarre. And then I've got my indicators and my horn on just the tiniest of little indicator stalks there. It's just so cool. And yeah, I think the next thing we need to do is go and drive it. It's just fantastic. You've got this old school, look at the sunroof there, remember those? Oh my days, it's like going back in time. It's like a time capsule, this car. Honestly, like a time capsule. 44,000 miles, that's it. Unbelievable. You got the rev counter, you got the little turbo boost gauge just there. It's just cool. Okay, I want to take you on the journey from me starting the car. Now, Tim isn't going to come out with us, and the reason for that is this car weighs 850 kilos. So the two of us in here would be what, I don't know, 180 kilos on top of that. That as a percentage of the car weight is a lot. It reminds me when I had my Caterham, the difference between just being in it on your own and having a passenger was massive. But let's get ready to rumble, as they say. 5-speed manual. I have a choke here. I wonder if I need to probably put a little bit of choke on. Remember what choke is? Oh, it starts straight away. I've got a little bit of choke. I'm just gonna take it out to start with, let all the temperatures build up. And I have no expectations of the car really. Oh, let's turn the stereo off. There we go, turn the stereo off. Right, here we go. So, it's just hunting a little bit. I've still got some choke on. Can you imagine the days of choke? I mean, it's a thing that most young drivers won't even know what it is. But yeah, so there we go. So a little bit of choke on, into first, handbrake, obs, and then let's find the biting point. Here we go. My first drive of a Renault 5 GT Turbo. I said I went out for a test drive. I was actually only ever in the passenger seat. I never got, don't have to worry about it being not wide enough to get out the gate. Oh wow. Here we go. So yeah, I think we're gonna have a lot of fun. I feel so small and vulnerable. I've got an XC90 in front of me. I reckon I could park this in the boot of that car. Look at the size difference. Now then, brake pedal feels a little bit squidgy. There's no power assistance, or if there is, it's very light. So it's pretty heavy steering. He's turning in, right, I'm gonna go. Right, here we go. And as I come down here, I'm going to push the choke in. Don't think I need the choke anymore. And then just let things get up to temperature. Gearbox, actually the throw on the gearbox feels really nice. And as soon as we are getting up to speed, the steering weight disappears and it becomes a little bit lighter. Obviously at slow speed, with the power assistance being minimal compared with modern day cars. And straight away the visibility is excellent. The A-pillars are like snooker cues basically. They're so tiny and the ride is quite jittery, and I'm driving a Renault 5 GT Turbo. This is so cool. Right, into a National 60 now. I'm going to wait for all the temperatures to come up. I've got my turbo boost gauge. Oh yeah, okay, I get it. It's got very little low down, and then as soon as the revs start to rise and the turbo spools up, you start to feel the car pick up on its heels a little bit. From about 3,500 RPM, you just feel the power come in a little bit. I just want to take it really carefully. This car's only just come out of a big restoration. Tim literally got it MOT last week. He has driven it. He drove it to the MOT station and back, but that's it. I'm really the first person post-restoration to drive this car. It's such a privilege. I'm just gonna, I don't know the roads around here. I just wanted to come out and have an explore. Let's go down. There's nothing behind me. Go down into second gear and just nothing, nothing, nothing. Turbo kicks in. Tell you what, I know it's only got 115 horsepower, but it feels pretty sprightly. especially if you're in the right rev range. If you're at anything over like 3,500 RPM, it's sweet. The other thing I've noticed is it's so small, placing it inside your lane. So I drove here in a new Audi RS6 Performance, which is massive. And you almost feel like with the left-hand wheels on the curb, the right-hand wheels are almost over the central reservation. Here, I've got room to maneuver. I've got probably a good half a car width, if not more, to play with. It's so noticeable. While we're mooching through this little town, it's worth noting these seats are really quite comfortable. They're very supportive. My legs are kind of canted off to the right a little bit and my arms off to the left a little bit, so I'm kind of feel like I'm doing that almost. So it's not the best ergonomics in the world, but as I said, visibility is pretty good, to be fair. Driving this car just reminds me of simpler times when you didn't have all the distractions of a modern day car. There's no massive, great big iPad-sized screen. There's no Apple CarPlay or podcast streaming. There's no satellite navigation. I've got an old Kenwood head unit to play the radio, and that's it. You know, the instrument binnacle is all analog, and there's no driver aids. There's no there's no safety in here either. There's no airbag, side impact protection. Well, yeah, that door doesn't look massively thick to me. You definitely wouldn't want to have a major oopsie in this. But that means that this car is really light. I'm starting to get my head around it now in terms of when the power's coming in, and even by modern standards, when that turbo kicks in, it feels quick. And again, I remember first one of these kind of modern classic cars I drove a few years ago there was an original Audi Quattro from like 1981. It was one of the Audi heritage cars, and that felt quick by today's standards. And then I just tried to put myself into the mindset of what it would be like driving this car in period, putting it up against its contemporaries. And the Renault 5 GT Turbo went up against some of the best hot hatches in history. The Golf GTI, the Peugeot 205 GTI, the Maestro MG Turbo, remember those? And they were all about this kind of horsepower and all about this kind of weight, but they were about the dynamics of driving. They were lightweight, they were nimble. And that spawned a whole genre of car. And the Renault 5 GT Turbo was right at the forefront of that. You can argue which came first, which was the first proper hot hatch. You could also argue which was the best hot hatch, whether it was the Renault 5 GT Turbo or the 205 GTI or the Golf. I'm not even going to go near that debate. It's way too contentious for me. But what was certain for me, I just had this love affair with the shape and the sheer class of the Renault 5 GT Turbo. now we've got a little bit of pace on. Yeah, the front end is a bit vague, but the acceleration, happy days. The nice thing about this car, compared with modern day super hatches, is you could probably drive this car quite hard, and actually you're not going to be in a huge amount of trouble with the law, because it just doesn't go that fast. It's not bad. What a great thing. Oh, big truck. I'm not a big fan of lorries in this. Oh, here we go, sweepy bends. Sweepy bends. Yeah, I could... Do you know what? Give me some seat time. I think this car is all about seat time. It's about learning the car, it's about learning what it can do, It's about learning just how much you can push it. I'm remembering it's only got 5 gears. I'm waiting for myself to go into 6th and not find one. But yeah, seat time in this car would be everything. And I think it would give you such a satisfying drive down a really nice twisty B road. You can tell, I think I'm going to be smiling for the rest of the day. And actually, the really interesting thing that's kind of I'm feeling right now is having driven the new R5, and I'm going to say a few things that might upset some people here. The new R5 is an all-electric car, so that instantly is going to alienate a whole bunch of petrol heads. But if you ignore the fact it's an electric car, when you drive the R5, it has this cheeky character to it. And I think that character is born of its looks, but also it's born of its driving dynamics. And I know, compared with this, it's like twice the weight. It's got, I don't know, another 80 horsepower or so. And you think, well, surely you can't compare them. But when you drive this car, it just has cheeky character. It has this joie de vivre. I've got to use that word. It's French. It has this joie de vivre. It has this kind of almost like attitude that asks you, it eggs you to rev it more. It eggs you on to make the turbo spool up. And when you do that, it just delivers the most fantastic amount of fun. And I'm on limited roads, I've got limited amounts of time with the car, and as I said, I don't want to push it too hard, but oh my days, is this car a hoot to drive. Oh yes, that's more like it. Yeah, they say never meet your heroes, but every now and again, when you do, you're not disappointed. I'm getting a bit more confident in the car, and when you open her up, she doesn't lag for speed, and you feel the lack of weight straight away. Oh yes. I don't even know where to begin summarising this one. A car I've wanted to drive in over 35 years of driving. So to actually enjoy it and share it with you has been very special. Massive thanks to Tim. He's got a few other real crackers we're going to drive this year. Cars with stories, cars that you don't see very much on the internet. But this was top of the list. And it just, now it's warm and now I've got my head around the mechanicals and what I can do with it. It just feels so contemporary in the drive. It's a mega bit of kit. And this particular car is in such good condition. They're so rare nowadays. You get it on a road and you open her up and just magnificent. A truly magnificent car. Now, tomorrow, I'm actually going to Paris, to Renault, to spend time with the new Renault 5 Turbo 3E. They're doing a hot version of the new R5. And the video is going to drop on the channel next week. And I can't wait to share it with you. But if you think the baton will hand from the Renault 5 GT turbos and the mid-engined Renault 5 turbos and the Gordinis and the super special things, that baton, that virtual baton, will hand over to the new Renault 5 Turbo 3E, an all-electric super hot hatch. So make sure you stay tuned and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss that video, because it will land on the channel next week. But for now, I'm going to enjoy driving this because it's just a truly magnificent thing. It harks back to days where things were simpler, things were lighter, and a 1.4 turbo with 115 horsepower was a lot. And I love it. And I hope you did too. Anyway, if you did, give me a thumbs up. Comments below are always welcome, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Petrol Ped for plenty more content to come, and I'll see you on the next build. You take care, guys. Drive safe.